This is the Jerusalem Post podcast Travel Edition. Coming up.
In a few years, no more survivors will be amongst us. That will be the happy hour of the denialists, the distortionists, and we have to be in the most authentic and solid base of data in order to confront them.
And usually they almost nothing with them, and this is the only things they could have and they could keep, and this is why it became so important for them.
If you believe in wonders and miracles, it's almost like my uncle's reaching out to some extent.
So sit back and enjoy the trip with Mark Gordon and David Harris. As Mark said in a recent edition of the podcast, for a variety of reasons, right now we're spending quite a bit of time in Israel, bringing you places that you may not have heard of in Israel previously, but also, and particularly in the case of this podcast, some of the best known, and I'll use this word advisedly, tourist sites in Israel. Mark, why the advisedly?
We are in the Hall of Names in Yad Vashem. When this podcast goes live, it will be just before International Holocaust Memorial Day, and it will be 80 years of the liberation of Auschwitz.
So let's just describe the room or the chamber in which we are now. As Mark said, it's called the Hall of Names. I guess it's circular. It's an American football, and it's been cut in half, and we are at the halfway point. Below us is what looks like a cave leading down to a pond, and above us, photographs.
It's odd that it's the Hall of Names because it isn't really names, it's mainly pictures. Surrounding us on the ceilings and the walls above us is picture after picture of people that perished during the Shoah.
At our level, though, there are bookshelves which are, I don't know if they're real books or if this is just part of the artwork, but hundreds and hundreds of books with names.
I actually thought that was an image because they are so neatly lined up. I thought it was a computer-generated image. I think these must be the names of the people that they have registered as being killed in the Shoah. And what's interesting is the shelves are not full. They go probably 3/4 of the way round, but to our left is an empty space. I assume for the names they are still yet to catalogue and find who perished in the Holocaust.
Later on in this podcast, we will hear that actually at Yad Vashem they have 5 million names. So yeah, your observation is probably absolutely right.
We have been granted an exclusive interview with the chairman of Yad Vashem, Dani, Dayan, and we ask him all sorts of questions that aren't necessarily touristy, just to find out what goes on at Yad Vashem.
But before we head off to that interview, let's just talk a little bit about the place. What do people find when they come here? First of all, the driveway into Yad Vashem.
Yad Vashem sits on Mount Herzl. It is next to the cemetery where most of Israel's great presidents and prime ministers are buried, and next to Israel's main military cemetery. As you carry on down Har Herzl, you go down a drive surrounded by trees. It looks like you're in a forest, and deep in that forest you find the Yad Vashem. It's not a museum, it's a site. It's almost like a small town.
It's a memorial over numerous buildings. We'll be visiting a couple of those buildings during this tour. We're going to get a sneak peek into a building that's not yet open to the public, but we'll give you details on that and you'll be able to visit it fairly soon in the next few months. But right now we're in the main museum, which seems to take a chronological look at the Holocaust.
It starts with the rise of Nazism and fascism across Europe. Chamber after chamber covers different parts of Europe, different eras. It covers the Wannsee Conference and the creation of the final solution, all the way through to the liberation of Auschwitz, the Aliyah afterwards, and it brings you here to the Hall of Names, the list of all of the people that were killed, or nearly all of the people that were killed.
Discover the future with Inside Israeli Innovation. I'm Eve Young from the Jerusalem Post, bringing you exclusive insights from Israel's top innovators. Each week, we dive into the latest trends in tech, business, and beyond with interviews from the brightest minds in the industry. Whether it's cutting-edge startups or revolutionary tech breakthroughs, Inside Israeli Innovation is your front row seat to the startup nation. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform and stay ahead of the curve. Inside Israeli Innovation, where innovation meets inspiration.
I'm Dani Dayan. I'm chairman of Yad Vashem since August 2021. And previously, among other things, I was the Consul General of Israel in New York.
The name Dayan is one that you hear a lot in Israeli history. Are you in any way part of that family?
Dynasty for the Americans.
Yes, actually we are. The family's origin is from a small shtetl in Ukraine named Zhashkov, some 100 kilometers south of Kiev. Part of the family emigrated, made Aliyah to Palestine, to Eretz Israel, long before the establishment of the state. To that branch belongs the famous General Moshe Dayan. My branch of the family emigrated first to Argentina and only made Aliyah after the Six-Day War in 1971. But my late father, whose name was incidentally also Moshe Dayan, although he had two eyes, and the famous general, had a common great-grandfather. In Europe and in Argentina, actually, the pronunciation was the same family name, the same last name, however, with the Ashkenazi pronunciation, Dayan and not Dayan. When we made Aliyah to Israel, we converted it to the pronunciation prevalent here, which is Dayan.
So we're going down a whole corridor that we didn't plan on, but does that mean that you had famous rabbis in your family because Dayan is the name of the head of the Jewish court?
Probably. I don't know how much famous, but for sure there was an observant family, a Hasidic family. I know that my family was related to a rabbinic Hasidic dynasty named Skver. New Yorkers among our listeners, I'm sure are aware of a town north of New York City named New Square, where the Skvera Rebbe sits, and I wouldn't say it as an especially moderate rabbi, to use an understatement. Nevertheless, when I came to New York and he was informed that my, great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather, when the Skvera Rebbe used to come to Zhashkov, would stay in his home, he told me, although I represented the Zionist state, he told me, you are part of us, you are not a guest here, you are part of our community. And I participated in many of the weddings of his grandchildren and other celebrations.
Does your family have a Holocaust story?
Most of my family, both paternal and maternal families, were far from Europe when the Holocaust happened. My parental family came to Argentina between the wars, and my maternal family are basically before the World War I. However, two of my dad's uncles that couldn't get certificates to make Aliyah to Eretz Israel back in the 30s and 40s were assassinated in the town of Warkowicz in Poland.
Tell us how you went from Argentina to being an Oleh Hadash at high school age in Israel to being chairman of Yad Vashem. Tell us a little bit about your history and your story.
You know, I come from a very Zionist family, non-observant, non-religious, but extremely Zionist family. We belonged, and I still consider myself a disciple of Zev Jabotinsky, the revisionist leader, fourth generation disciple of Jabotinsky. It was clear to us that the moment conditions will enable that, we will make Aliyah. It was only a question of time. In 1971, we made Aliyah. We made Aliyah with my parents. Since this is also the travel podcast, it will be proper to mention that we were due to be actually the last Olim of 1970. Our El Al flight was due to arrive to Lod Airport, not even Ben Gurion Airport, on December 31st around 11:30 p.m. But since it was an El Al flight, obviously we were the first Olim of 1971 because it was delayed.
We had a joke when we were kids, El Al, every landing, always late.
My professional career went in other directions. My bachelor degree, my BSc is in computer science and economy. My master degree is in finance. And I established at a quite young age, much before it was fashionable, I established in 1982 a software company that was very successful, Elad Systems. I sold my interest in the company in 2004. So in spite of the fact that, as I said, my career went in different directions, What really always I was passionate about is Zionism, is Jewish history. I think that for me Jewish history is something living. It's not something that belongs to the past, that is something that belongs to my present and my future. I live Jewish history. So when I returned from New York, I was already 65. After such an exciting position as representing Israel in New York, there were really only a handful of missions I would have taken. But when the government asked me to take the chairmanship of Yad Vashem, I simply saluted and came to work here.
So you took over from two chairmen that had been here for 50 years, Yitzhak Arad and Avner Shalev. How do you feel taking over for people who've been here for more than 2 generations, who've got big shoes to fill?
Well, definitely it's a responsibility, a huge responsibility that I hope to be worthy of. Yitzhak Arad was not only chairman of Yad Vashem, but he was a partisan in Lithuania. He was an historian. He was a general in the IDF, a multifaceted person. Unfortunately, he passed away just a few months before I assumed my position as chairman of Yad Vashem, and I didn't have the opportunity to have personally his advice. With Avner Shalev, obviously, I sit frequently and learn from his vast experience and try to do my best not to shame this dynasty, to use again the terms of leaders of Yad Vashem that made this venerable institution what it is.
It's maybe, thankfully, a long time since the Shoah. What is your role, Yad Vashem, now in 2025?
When I came to Yad Vashem back in 2021, I thought that according to modern marketing theories, you have to try to encapsulate your mission in one message. And I tried to do that, but very quickly I understood that it is impossible. The event is so wide, so vast, and the time that has elapsed since is so brief that we don't have the perspective to try to dilute the Holocaust into 1 or 2 notions. So basically the first thing is to tell the story. We have to continue to tell the story to as many audiences as possible. We opened Yad Vashem these years since I came here to new audiences that we didn't reach for different reasons till now. But I would say that there are 3 layers that we have to do. The first is to collect data, to collect documentation, to collect artifacts. We have to be in the most solid possible database of facts, of proofs, in order to prevail when we approach the crossroads of generations, when in a few years no more survivors will be amongst us. That will be the happy hour of the denialists, the distortionists, and we have to be in the most possible authentic and solid base of data in order to confront them. And then the second layer is research. The research that we invest so much with our International Institute of Holocaust Research converts the data into knowledge. And then the third layer, and some would say the most important layer, is to propagate that knowledge, to propagate through education, to propagate through exhibitions, and to propagate in ways that are apt for a young generation that, as we all know, has an attention span that is becoming shorter and shorter. So those are extremely challenging tasks, but we don't have the privilege to neglect them.
This is Mark Gordon from the Jerusalem Post podcast Travel Edition. Find us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at MarkDavidPod, or mail us at markdavidpod@gmail.com.
So we've come down into what's called the collections area, more on that in a minute. As we came through into a climate-controlled area, in front of us is a table, and on it there are various artifacts. There's a teddy bear, there's a cup, and there's a spoon. And Mark is talking about the spoon right now.
My uncle would have the spoon with him. It was kept at the family home. When he passed away, I think my aunt passed away a few years later, and when they went to the house, they knew this existed. So it wasn't hidden. He'd been quite open with his family about it. One of the things they wanted to do is send it to Yad Vashem so other people could see it. But he'd certainly filled out pages of testimony before and had been in contact with Yad Vashem.
There was a letter near the spoon which explained what is the spoon and asked the family to donate it to Yad Vashem. This is what I know. We even exhibited this spoon in a small exhibition in the entrance of Yad Vashem in the reception hall, and we told all the story about Arthur and what's happened to him and about the spoon and how it actually saved his life.
So my understanding of the story is they were on a train to Mauthausen?
To Mauthausen from Flossenberg. No, there is Flossenberg and there is Flossberg, and it was Flossberg.
Okay, so he was on a train from Flossberg to Mauthausen. They managed to open the carriage and get out of the carriage, and all he had with him was his spoon and possibly his cup, which he used for his food every day. There was a guard on top of the carriage, and the guard took the bullets, and he took the end off the bullets so that they were like dum-dums. They would explode on impact, and he saw people dying around him as he got off, and all of a sudden he was hit in the leg, and the only thing that saved him was the fact that the spoon was in his pocket, and it took the blast of the bullet, and that's why the spoon looks like it does.
As you can see, each artifact really tells the story of the people, and it is very important for us to try to build, to crystallize the story as much wide as we can, so they can actually be sort of testimony or sort of evidence for what happened, certainly because the survivors themselves are not here to tell the story, and we can show the artifact and with their own words tell the story like if they are here. And it's very important, I think, for people to see the artifacts, because there is something very, very deep and strong where you can see artifacts that actually were there in this time of the war, and they're here. They are like transferring somehow the history to now and here, instead of being something very, very far away and long time ago.
I was very Israeli in that I was eavesdropping and then actually stuck a microphone in between you and Mark, but we didn't get to hear who you are. Can you introduce yourself and tell us where we are?
Yes, my name is Michael Tal, and I'm the curator and the director of the artifacts collection of Yad Vashem, and we are in the room that dedicated for the different works of the art of the curators.
We're down below ground.
We are 3 floors below ground, and this is the place where the artifacts are kept, and this is the place where we prepare them, catalog them, and everything.
How many artifacts and what types are here?
The artifact collection of Yad Vashem consists of more than 35,000 artifacts of different size, different material. Those artifacts that survivors managed to keep, to have with them when the war was finished. And usually they almost nothing with them, and this is the only things they could have and they could keep, and this is why it became so important for them.
Thank you so much. And just a note that the collections area will soon be open for public tours. Mark, you've got gloves on. They're letting you hold the spoon. As we've travelled around Europe, whether we've been recording or you've just been talking to me, the word spoon has become something of a thing between us.
I think when we've been travelling, like you say, when we go to... Sorry, I'm a little bit overawed by this. When we go to Holocaust museums, centres to the righteous of the nation, I always tell my uncle's story. It is this one story that connects me with the Shoah and my family. And I've not seen the spoon since I was 18, 19. So it's really amazing to see it. It's really amazing to see it in such a place where, you know, hundreds and thousands of people will come in and be able to see it and learn my uncle's story. And obviously not just my uncle's story, but the story of all the people that survived and some of the people that were killed in the Shoah.
To talk the latest news in Israel, the Jewish world, and everything in between.
This is the J-Post Podcast. I'm Tamar Uriel-Beery, Deputy Editor-in-Chief of the Jerusalem Post.
And I'm Tzvika Klein, Editor-in-Chief of the Jerusalem Post.
And I'm Sarah Ben-Nun, Night Editor at the Jerusalem Post. Join us as we bring some of the most impactful voices to bring you into what it means to be Jewish, to be Israeli today.
Every week, we bring you with us into the newsroom in every sense.
Stop being so dramatic. This is just our coffee break.
You can find us every Thursday on jpost.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We'll see you there.
Yalla, bye.
You're listening to the Jerusalem Post podcast travel edition with Mark Gordon and David Harris. We're in conversation with Dani Dayan, the chairman of Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. Mark.
As David just said, this is the travel podcast of the Jerusalem Post and not the news podcast. Why specifically invite us today to Yad Vashem as opposed to the news podcast with the International Holocaust Memorial Day approaching?
Because if we do not engage audiences, we don't bring here people, then we cannot succeed. One thing that for sure is not an economic reason. Entrance to Yad Vashem is free. We do not make a profit from people coming to Yad Vashem. On the contrary, it costs us. But we need people to come to learn. Look, I was naive enough, I must admit, to believe that after such a horrific event, a cataclysmic event that happened to the Jewish people and to humanity during the Shoah, we will at least be, for a century, immune from anti-Semitism. I thought that it can't be that such a thing happens and in less than a century will be forgotten. But we see that that is the situation. We see the rampant anti-Semitism. During my years in New York, barely 4 years, 15 Jews were murdered in anti-Semitic attacks in Pittsburgh, in Jersey City, in Poway, California, in Muncie, New York. And we see now in the last year and a half rampant anti-Semitism that has so many forms. I'm not claiming that learning about the Shoah is the cure for all forms of anti-Semitism, but it is an integral part, an essential part in the war against this scourge that once again raises its ugly head.
Perhaps it's somewhat ironic that the attacks that you're talking about have been taking place in Western Europe, in North America and other parts of the world, with perhaps one exception, which is Central Eastern Europe. Poland, we're not hearing so much about attacks. The same with Slovakia, Lithuania. There's an irony there, isn't there?
Well, unfortunately, I must dispute the data. There are serious anti-Semitic attacks and incidents also in those places that you mentioned, although probably the magnitude is less than in others. You asked me earlier about my personal Shoah story. I made a decision at a very young age, when I was a teenager. I made a personal decision never to visit Germany. That was my way to remember. It wasn't about hatred, it was about my way to remembering. There is a Jewish custom that not many people do it today, but there are those that live in their living room a patch of wall unpainted in order to remember that Jerusalem was destroyed 2,000 years ago. That was my way to remember. I am an avid traveler all my life, but I knew there is a white patch in the map of Europe that you don't visit in order to remember that something so terrible happened to our nation there. When I became chairman of Yad Vashem, I had to make the difficult decision whether to visit Germany or not. And I decided to go when I was invited by the president of the Bundestag, the parliament, to open an exhibition in the Bundestag. I decided to go because I thought that the same reason that prevented me from going is the same reason that makes me go. As chairman of Yad Vashem, I can strengthen memory by coming, and I think I was right. I met the entire German leadership there, the president Steinmeier, the Chancellor Scholz, the leader of the opposition Merz, and the president of the Bundestag, Barbel Bass. I told the Chancellor Scholz that he says all the right things. All of them do. President, the Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition, the Speaker of the Parliament. But the real challenge is whether those statements by the leadership and good intentions, I can say, by the leadership, trickles down to civil society. And that is the challenge that we have. Not to be satisfied by nice statements by leaders, but to force them, I would even say, morally force them, to make the effort to educate the civil society, to prevent the civil society from adopting bigotry and from renouncing anti-Semitism. And that is a big challenge that unfortunately not even, I cannot say those countries that you mentioned, although they make efforts, that's right, have succeeded yet to do.
A few months ago in Amsterdam, there was an attack on Israeli tourists and football fans. The word pogrom was used by the Israeli government. Furthermore, we've heard people using the term genocide very freely, calling Israelis Nazis. How do you feel about the abuse of terminology from the Holocaust in current discourse?
I think very badly about that. Even, if you mention specifically the case in Amsterdam, I think that even we probably made a mistake, that we understood it as the reports evolved. But we should be extremely careful not to mix. Probably you bring me to the question that probably is at the crux of this matter, that I am so frequently asked whether October 7th is a continuation of the Shoah. And when President Biden came to Yad Vashem in June or July 2022, I have some 50 seconds, 1 minute to be with him alone before he was greeted by our president and prime minister. And I told him during that minute when we walked from his motorcade to the Hall of Remembrance, I told him, Mr. President, if you want to understand Israeli society, if you want to understand Israelis, if you want to understand individual Israelis, you have to know that the Shoah is omnipresent somewhere in the back of our heads, in the back of our minds. Every Israeli has some place for the Shoah in the back of his mind, and we have that as collectively. I was reminded of that on October 7th, when we watched the TV reports of mothers muffling the mouths of their toddlers in order to prevent them from crying and being discovered by the assailants. The intuitive, the associative thought of, I believe, every single Israeli, every single Jew was Anne Frank in the attic, or those stories we heard from mothers doing exactly that in the barn in Ukraine. But then came October 8th and 9th and November and December and 2024 and 2025, and we have to say very clearly, October 7th is not a continuation of the Shoah, and the same terminology shouldn't be used. It's not a continuation, not because there are not similarities. Of course there are similarities in the cruelty, in the sadism, in the intention, in the genocidal intention. But there are huge differences. And the biggest difference, of course, is the fact that in the Shoah, all we could do is to beg President Roosevelt, Prime Minister Churchill, to bomb the railways to Auschwitz. Here in southern Israel, we didn't have to beg anyone. We do what we consider proper to do. The security teams of the kibbutzim and the soldiers that eventually arrived, yes, the heroism was the same heroism of Mordechai Anilevich and Pavel Frenkel in the Warsaw Ghetto, but the purpose was completely different. It wasn't to die with dignity. It was to save lives. And that makes the whole difference. And that's the reason I couldn't resist but to criticize my friend Gilad Erdan when he donned a yellow star, a yellow patch in the Security Council, because we are not merciless anymore.
While we're talking about October the 7th, particularly because we're in Yad Vashem, it would be remiss of us not to mention Alex Danzig, who was killed mercilessly in those days. Tell us a little bit about who Alex was.
I must admit I didn't have the privilege to meet Alex Danzig, because when I arrived to Yad Vashem in August 21, he already retired. But I think that when we heard from those that were released in the first round that he gives classes of Holocaust history in the tunnels of Hamas, that was really gut-wrenching. But I think that what I learned from the stories I heard about Alex Danzig, so many stories, is an incredible sense of the intellectual curiosity, whether it is about the Shoah, Polish poetry, or how to grow organic peanuts. In everything he wanted to excel, in everything he wanted to be an expert. And his modesty. Again, we are in a travel podcast. In fact, in spite of the fact that I never met Alex Danzig, Zichrono Livracha, I had a kind of, metaphysical encounter with him. And that was in Lublin. I was in Lublin. I am, among other things, the deputy chairman of the International Auschwitz Council, and had a free day in Lublin. And I wanted to visit all the Jewish sites. And the way to do it is with the assistance of the guy that Alex Danzig wrote about Jewish Lublin. Now, it was May 2024. I believe he was still alive in the tunnels of Hamas. And that sensation, that feeling that went back and forth from the grave of the seer of Lublin in the cemetery, but I couldn't resist to think about Alex Danzig when I read those letters, those lines, and then to Chachmei Lublin, the yeshiva, and back to Alex Danzig in the tunnel, and the Umschlagplatz, and back to Alex Danzig. So basically, Alex accompanied me in a very poignant way during my walk in the streets of Jewish Lublin, and that was an experience that I will never forget.
We'll take this opportunity to plug one of our previous podcasts in Lublin, where we visited both of the places that you mentioned, Dani, and also a personal trip to Majdanek, which was a very, very painful visit for both Mark and myself.
While we've been on our travels, one of the features we've seen across Europe is museums to those people who Yad Vashem consider the righteous amongst the nations. In Markowa in Poland, we went to the Ulma Family Museum. In Riga, we went to the Janusz Lipka Memorial, both righteous amongst the nations here in Yad Vashem. How do you feel about these museums being established outside of Israel?
Well, first of all, I must say the phenomena of righteous among the nations is really very inspiring. The fact that non-Jews risk their lives without any compensation or remuneration, those are the conditions to be awarded the title of righteous among the nations. To save Jews in a period in which moral darkness prevailed all over Europe and the world is really amazing. There was a public argument in Israel here when the last agreement between Israel and Poland, the Ministry of Education, was signed about the list of institutions, and one of them was indeed the Markowa Museum dedicated to the Ulma family. The Ulma family, righteous among the nations without any reservation, and admirable heroes. And I believe that museums like this should be visited, but with the context of a knowledgeable guide that gives the right context. And unfortunately, there were many more bystanders than righteous among the nations, and yes, many more collaborators than righteous among the nations in most countries.
As you've reminded us and listeners, this is actually a travel podcast and we're getting way more serious than we normally do. Yad Vashem is the second most visited tourist destination in Israel after the Kotel, after the Western Wall. It's a bit strange to think of a place like Yad Vashem as a tourist destination, but how do you market yourself in a travel perspective?
Well, if you think that is weird, then I saw on Twitter quite a few posts about having a first date in Yad Vashem. There was even an explanation why, because if the prospective partner is not interested in Yad Vashem, then I don't want him or her. I think that even TripAdvisor put Yad Vashem once as a romantic place, which that is an exaggeration. First of all, people want to know. The interest in the Holocaust isn't diminishing. Actually, it's rising in the political arena, but also in the public arena. I think that it's natural that when people come to Israel, they want to see this superb museum. By the way, not only the historical museum, we have an art museum, a museum of art that has works of art exclusively made by Jews during the Shoah or immediately after by survivors, which is, think about it, quite mind-boggling. That when the Nazis tried to eradicate any resemblance of being human being of the Jews, there are those that continue to engage in what can be considered the most sublime manifestation of being a human being, which is producing art. And we have now the addition of a collection center in which we are recording this podcast, and we are in our attempt to find new ways that will engage people. We have a theater in Yad Vashem that will bring to life through monodramas, artifacts and testimonies from the Shoah, and we will open an immersive audiovisual experience about the Jewish communities that existed before the Shoah and were obliterated in the Shoah. I am not surprised that Yad Vashem is the second most visited place in Israel. I wouldn't call it attraction, but the second most visited place in Israel. I differ to the Kotel. It's okay with me that they will continue to be number one.
Where can people find out more about Yad Vashem and book tickets to come here?
I think the place is our website, yadvashem.org.il, where you can find much deeper information. You can search our vast databases, collections, both of victims of the Shoah, names. We have almost 5 million individual names that are also displayed in the Book of Names here in Yad Vashem, and also to book tickets for those parts of Yad Vashem that are not free. but most of Yad Vashem is free.
Dani, Dayan, Chairman of Yad Vashem, thank you for giving so much time to us and for taking us around Yad Vashem today.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to chat with you and to take you a little bit further from your usual traveling destinations to a place that is very close for the Israelis, very close to any Jew, but is so central and so important.
You're listening to the Jerusalem Post podcast Travel Edition. Find us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at MarkDavidPod or mail us at markdavidpod@gmail.com. We've come back to the Hall of Names to end this podcast. Mark, we've already heard during our time here, one of your connections very close to the Shoah. How are you feeling?
I'm still in shock because what happened before we started is I'd asked Simi, who we'll say thank you to in a minute, the PR guy, whether he was able to locate the spoon which was in the collection at Yad Vashem. It had been on exhibition 2 years ago. It turns out that he hadn't done it and it had been bought out for a group that were coming after us. So if you believe in wonders and miracles, I feel a bit, I don't know, I just feel really fascinated in a way that the spoon appeared without it's supposed to appearing. It's almost like my uncle's reaching out to some extent.
On the other hand, I was hoping to see a video, and I'm sure we walked past it this time. There's so much to see here. There's a video of, well, you may remember we went to Western Latvia in an earlier podcast, and the main reason we went there was to find my family roots. There's a video here in Yad Vashem, which is the only known film footage of people being taken to execution. This is at the Shkeda beach, and you see the troughs being dug, and it's the only time that you actually see in film people being executed, and then afterwards you see the bodies in the troughs. This was a film taken by a Nazi officer who was visiting at the time, and it's the place where my family, cousins and so on were slaughtered. And so you're talking about the serendipity of finding the spoon. I'm feeling the loss of not having seen the video.
I think after we finish recording, let's go for another walk and see if we can see it. Maybe we were being held up by a group of Israeli soldiers that were here as part of an educational trip.
It is amazing how central, and Dani, Dayan was saying this, how central this place is to the Jewish psyche.
Absolutely, and especially now we're recording this in January 2025, as I said, just before the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. In the front of everybody's mind is still the war, it's still the hostages, it's still anti-Semitism around the world, and coming here gives you a grounding and a reflection and a time to think about where we sit in the world, how important our behavior is, how the world sees us, and how we have to not be afraid of who we are, but understand who we are.
Here's a question which maybe we should have discussed way back at the start. We discussed it a bit with Dani. Is this a tourist attraction? Is this a tourist site?
Yes, I think so. If you are coming to Israel, to me, this is one of the two must-dos. You must go to the Kotel and you must come here. There is no way that you should come to Israel and not come to Yad Vashem. It's so fundamental to the being of Israel, and it's so fundamental to Jewish history.
Okay, you said we should say some thank yous.
Obviously, first thank you to Dani, Dayan for inviting us and for appearing on the podcast.
And of course to Simi and Ashley and Oren. And Oren, good luck. It was your second day on the job meeting us. Hopefully you're going to stay here and we didn't scare you off. But thank you to all of you on the PR team.
We also need to say thank you to Michael Tal from the Collection Centre.
All it remains for us to do is to say, please like this, share it, tell your friends about the podcast, write a review. Just help us to get word out there. For Mark and I, this just started as, I guess, a bit of a hobby, and as you already know by now, a chance to get some tours, visits around the world. But it's also become a passion for us. And so a visit to a place like Yad Vashem is incredibly meaningful. And we want other people to know about this place and all of the others that we visit. So please do share the word.
Our next podcast is our 100th podcast.
Ooh.
But in those 99 podcasts we've recorded so far, it's been wonderful for me and educational and life-changing for me to go and to be able to see around Europe where my family came from, what happened to them, learn about all these countries that I learned about in school, and just experience for real what goes on in the world. As David said, please share this podcast, please like us, please tell your friends about it, because we want to make another 100 after this.
When Mark said please like us, it's not that he's desperate for friends, which he is. He meant just hit the like button rather than liking Mark and David.
Or send an email to markdavidpod@gmail.com and say you actually genuinely like us and want to meet us. And if you're a nice person, we might meet you.
From Jerusalem, shalom, shalom, and we'll see you next time on episode 100.
Goodbye.